everyone. I'm Sarah Guernelli. Welcome to the 12 Respond Show. Our guest this week is Professor Liam Malloy of Economics. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. It's always a pleasure.
Before we jump into the government shutdown, inflation impacts, give me a little bit about your background.
So, I am the chair of the economics department at the University of Rhode Island. I've been here for about 16 years. My research tends to focus on the causes and consequences of economic inequality, looking at things like tax rates, the minimum wage, health insurance coverage, things like that.
All the fun stuff. So we're nearly a month into the federal government shutdown. How does this have a ripple effect in the economy?
Well, so I mean, the first sort of effect is that it's all of the federal employees who aren't getting paid, right? So, one thing that I always stress in any macroeconomic situation is that one person's spending is another person's income. And so, not only are federal employees, most federal employees, not getting paid, but that means that they're not spending as much as well. And so, that means that other people are experiencing less income as well. So, the longer this lasts, the more people are going to have to reduce their spending, and the more it will sort of spread throughout the economy.
And I can imagine that people who are furloughed are being impacted by this. They're really probably pretty stressed about what's going on and how to even allocate their funds for their monthly budgets.
I would imagine so. I mean, most Americans, don't have savings to last a long time, right? So, maybe we can miss a paycheck, but missing two paychecks is going to be very difficult. And then, if we continue to miss more paychecks, that's going to put a lot of stress on those employees. Many of those employees will be eligible for, state unemployment benefits, but that, of course, does not replace all of their income. And it's a little bit dependent on the state in which they reside.
How quickly do we feel the impact of this with the federal government being shut down, people not spending as much money? Are businesses feeling this right now, or is this going to continue to be felt even if the government opens up eventually?
So, I mean, there's a couple questions there. I think, some businesses are definitely starting to feel the impact, especially ones that, contract directly with the federal government. And so, you're not getting paid right now if that's the case. Other companies will start to feel it more and more as income goes down. If, SNAP benefits don't get paid in November, then companies that serve that population are going to see their revenue fall. In terms of whether it will sort of continue after the shutdown ends, depends a little bit first on how long it lasts, right? Because the longer it lasts, the more sort of we have an effect sort of every week. And the other piece is whether or not federal employees receive back pay. So traditionally, they always have received back pay, and in fact, there is a law from 2019 that says they must receive back pay. But there's been some talk out of the White House that maybe, especially the furloughed employees, might not receive back pay, and so that will depend on whether the economy can recover quickly or not.
I was just speaking with one of my friends. She works for the federal government, isn't being paid right now. Some of her colleagues who have dealt with a government shutdown before, their first line of defense is taking out loans to help supplement their budget. Is this common?
Well, I mean, it makes sense, right? Because if you're confident that you're going to get paid back, whether it's in a week or a month, then taking out a loan makes a lot of sense, right? It's not that you don't have the income, you just don't have the cash. That said, if the longer it lasts, it could be more difficult to pay back those loans. And of course, with any type of loan, you want to make sure that you're not paying a super high interest rate. Payday loans, of course, are notorious for, charging a very high sort of annual interest rate. And so that will, end up decreasing the overall amount of income that you receive, but it could still be worth it in this situation.
If you're not a federal worker, you're not impacted by the potential of not getting your SNAP benefits. You're just a everyday person going about their business. Some people don't even know that the government is shut down. How are they feeling the impact of this? Because it must be hitting people's wallets.
Yeah, so I think, the longer it goes on, what we'll experience is that there's less spending in the economy. And so, you might see that demand in your company is going down. And so you're selling less than you would. Firms will eventually have to decide whether or not they want to have the same number of employees that they do. And so there might be increasing layoffs. I don't think we've seen a lot of that yet, although I've definitely read anecdotal evidence of companies reducing their headcount. But I think we're still at the anecdotal phase right now. But, we are a week away from the longest shutdown we've had. And so, that could increase as time goes on.
What do you make of this if we are a week away from the longest government shutdown? What do you make of this? What does it say when you're looking back at past government shutdowns about the economy?
Well, so I mean, the longest one we had was over the sort of 2018, 2019 winter. It was 35 days. It ended up being an estimate of a little bit less than 0.1% per week. So that would be about 0.5, 0.4% less GDP growth. So, substantial, but not catastrophic. In this case, we have even more furloughed workers than we did then. I mean, I'm a little surprised it's lasted this long. In past examples, most of the previous shutdowns have been with divided government. And here we don't have divided government. So, I'm a little surprised that, they haven't just said, okay, well, the cost is too much here, either politically or economically, and so we're going to end that. But we haven't seen that yet.
In a government shutdown, it costs a lot of money, billions of dollars. Where does that money actually go if it's lost in the economy?
So, I mean, it's interesting, right? It's not like the government is paying money every, day that we're closed. It's really about decreased output, right? So we're not doing things. We're not running our national parks. And so people aren't going and paying money and enjoying the national parks. We're not producing economic data. And so the Federal Reserve is not getting the value of that economic data when it's making its decisions about whether to, increase or decrease interest rates. And so it's really the lost work, right? The federal workers provide value in the things that they do. And so every day that they are not working is value that's not being created. And so that's really where the estimates of, billions of dollars per day come from in terms of the shutdown.
Do you have a prediction of where this could go, how long this could last, looking at past data? I mean, I know we're nearing uncharted territory, it feels like.
Yeah, I don't really. I mean, I think it's always a political decision about when to end the shutdown, and that will only come when one political party or the other feels like the cost that they're bearing is higher than the benefit that they're getting from the shutdown. It's a little unclear to me what the benefits are for either party at this point, except sort of to hurt the other party, I guess. So hopefully at some point they'll be able to reach a compromise and pass a continuing resolution that will allow the government to to reopen.
So you mentioned, we've talked about federal workers being on furlough. The SNAP benefits could be delayed for November. Past that, what other consequences could we face if this continues?
Well, so the administration has been trying to move money around in order to make it less impactful for people, right? So the Pentagon found money in its budget to pay the troops for the October 15th pay date. But there's not, at least based on what I've read, enough money to do that again for the end of October. And so the longer it goes on, the less creative accounting we'll be able to have in order to keep people paid, which means that economic impact will just get larger and larger. And then, of course, the longer it goes on, the less people are working, the more value that's just lost to the economy, and the harder it is to come back, right? So you can imagine a furloughed worker saying, "Okay, well, I'm not going to buy, this new dishwasher this month because I'm not getting paid. But then once I get my back pay, then okay, I'm going to go buy that dishwasher." And so
So
then it's just a timing issue, right? It's just, all right, well, they didn't buy it in October, but they ended up buying it in November. But the longer it goes on, right, then the more sort of uncertainty there is, the more firms will start actually laying people off that it's not directly caused by the federal shutdown, but caused indirectly. And so now that income is going to be lost more permanently, and that will have a larger impact on the economy. So, if we think about the costs to the economy of the shutdown, it's probably not just like a straight line, right? It's not just increasing by the same amount every day. It's probably pretty low at first, and then it's going to start increasing more and more as it goes on.
All right. We're running out of time so we're just going to hit a break. But when we come back, we're going to talk about the latest inflation report because that did just come out, and continue to talk about the government shutdown. We'll be right back. All right, welcome back. So we just left off talking about how the government shutdown impacts the economy. Professor Malloy, I want to ask you about inflation and how it's measured for people who might not be super familiar with it.
Right. So the Bureau of Labor Statistics every month goes out across the country and looks at prices that a typical consumer would face. And so that's going to include everything from rental prices to gas prices to food prices to movie tickets. And they do a weighted average and they compare it to the last month in terms of the cost. And the percent change of that cost is what we define as the consumer price index inflation. And so it's an average, right? It's not going to be this inflation rate that's faced by every individual. And it's going to vary somewhat by geography as well.
Well, we looked at the latest inflation report that just came out last week. It's about 3%, a little bit higher than the previous month. What does this say overall for inflation right now?
So, inflation is a little bit higher than we would like it. The Federal Reserve tends to target an inflation rate of 2%. That said, right, 3% is a lot lower than it was in sort of 2022, 2023, where it topped out at about 9%. But it's still a little bit high. I mean, interestingly, it was a little bit lower in this last report than most people were expecting, but still definitely not down to that 2% range.
When people are hearing 2%, why does the Federal Reserve want inflation down to 2%? Is that the comfortability area? We're out of the recession thought bubble of what could happen with that. Because I know for a long time we talked about, is it going to happen? Is it going to happen? It's a soft landing. Why is it 2%?
So 2% it gives them a little bit of cushion, right? And so what they're trying to avoid is, significantly higher inflation, so 4, 5, 6%. But they also want to avoid deflation. And that sounds a little bit funny to most people because deflation means prices are going down, which seems great. But the problem with deflation is that when deflation gets into an economy, now people making a decision about when to purchase are saying, well, I could buy that car now, but I expect it to be 20% cheaper in 6 months. So I'm not going to buy it now, I'll buy it then. And so it pushes off all these decision prices. And then if we're not buying as much, then we don't need to produce as much. If we're not producing as much, we don't need as many employees working. And so it puts the economy into a depression. And frankly, the only time, of the last 100 years that we had significant deflation was during the Great Depression in the 1930s.
When we're looking at going to the grocery store, it does feel like we are still paying a lot to feed our family, to put clothes on our backs. Why are we still feeling that prices are high when inflation has come down compared to 9.1% in 2022?
Yeah.
Why are we still feeling that?
Well, because as long as it's positive, it means prices are still going up, right? And so, economists will say, yay, inflation has come down from 9% to 2%. But that doesn't mean that prices came down, right? Prices, are still higher than they were, and they're still going up by, in fact, 3% per year. And really, what we've seen is that food prices have gone up by even a little bit more than 3% per year recently. And it's actually sort of like things like gas prices that have come down. So at the grocery store, every month you're still seeing a higher bill if you're buying the same things.
And why is that? How can we bring prices down? Because that's the ultimate goal. That's what consumers want. Everyone wants to pay a little bit less.
Yes. And if you look at like long run history, right? Prices in many things have come down. The price of food today is much cheaper than it was 50 years ago. The price of cars are cheaper. The price of like think about televisions, right? They're much cheaper. And the only way that that happens is through higher productivity, where we can produce more per hour worked. And so that's the only way to really bring prices down and make us feel richer is by investing in the technology that allows us to produce more. And if we can produce more, then we'll be able to afford more. And so no matter whether that's because the actual dollar price went down or because our wages went up so much that the small 2 or 3% increase in the dollar price doesn't really matter to us because we're so much richer. And that's what we see. That's what we've seen looking back 30, 50, 100 years. But over the last 3 years, I think people are seeing, prices that are 20% higher. And maybe their income is up 20%, but maybe it's not. Maybe it's only up 10%. And so now you're experiencing higher prices and you're feeling like you can't afford as much.
The Federal Reserve is expected to meet tomorrow. We're taping on October 28th. Do you think that the chairman will lower interest rates?
I mean, I think they probably will. I think the markets are expecting, them to lower interest rates probably by another quarter point or 25 basis points. Um, for one thing, the hiring that we saw in July and August was pretty weak. We obviously did not get the September jobs report, so we're not sure about employment from September. But also, of course, the government shutdown is weakening the economy, and so that's just more evidence that the economy is struggling a bit, and so that both of those things argue for continued rate cuts, despite inflation. Right, inflation is still a little bit higher than where they want it, but I think they probably will cut.
If the Fed does cut rates, how do people feel that impact?
Well, so lower interest rates directly impact people mainly through borrowing, right? So if they are buying a house, they may see a lower mortgage interest rate. If they're buying a car, they may see a lower interest rate there. Overall, for the economy, right, it makes borrowing costs lower. That hopefully encourages firms to invest. And when firms invest, that means somebody is hiring, that means jobs are more plentiful, and hopefully wages are going up. At least that's the goal for the Federal Reserve.
Is the government shutdown making it more difficult for the Federal Reserve to make this cut, or do you foresee it being future cuts might be a little bit trickier compared to now?
I mean, I think it is making the Federal Reserve's jobs harder, right? Because the Federal Reserve relies on lots of data sources, but also on, um, you know, federal data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics and the Bureau of Economic Analysis, as well as, private data that they look at. And so the less data that they have, the less confident they can be about what the right decision is. In this case, I think at least for this rate cut, they probably would have done the same thing as well. Although, who knows, right? If the September jobs report had shown a decrease in jobs of 100,000 or something, showing that we were really finally entering that recession that everybody had been worried about, then they might have done a bigger rate cut. But since they don't have that data, perhaps they will be more conservative and do just a quarter point. So it makes their job harder, and it makes the economy sort of less certain without all of that data.
We're talking about this instability. How do consumers feel right now? Are they confident in the way the economy is going with or without the federal government? I mean, what do you think?
Yeah. So, I mean, what we've seen, so there's, a few major surveys that try to measure consumer sentiment, and we've seen consumer sentiment sort of fall recently. Um, and I think that has a lot to do with the labor market, right? Because when when people are more likely to be laid off. What we've seen, especially recently, is an increase in the long-term unemployed. So one of the things that we measure is the number of workers who've been unemployed for 6 months or more, and that number has been increasing pretty steadily over the last 6 months. And so that's a sign that the labor market is not where we want it to be, and that definitely impacts consumer sentiment. The inflation that we were just talking about impacts consumer sentiment. And so, that makes people a little bit more nervous, a little bit less willing to spend, and that can impact the economy in general if consumers pull back on spending.
And what do you see for the holidays?
Well, I think it's going to depend a lot, right? So, we've talked in the past about whether the economy is going to enter a recession. I think consumers will probably be a little bit less confident in this holiday than they have been in the last couple. Whether that means, less spending, we'll have to see. Whether it means firms hire less, right? So firms tend to hire a lot for the holiday season, temporary workers. And so one of the things that we sort of check on is, all right, well, how is that temporary hiring for October, November, December compared to previous years? Obviously, we'll need the government to provide that data for us, and so we won't have that unless there's an end to the shutdown.
People hear that word recession. It's a scary thought. Briefly, is there a possibility that that could happen, or do you think we have kind of cleared that area?
Well, no, I think there's still a possibility, and I think there was a possibility before the government shutdown, and the shutdown, if anything, puts the thumb on the scale at least a little bit for a potential recession. I think that the nervousness that we saw in July and August from, the sort of slower hiring than we had seen previously, it's interesting because the unemployment rate is still pretty low at like 4.4%, or at least that's what it was in August. But we have that increasing number of long-term unemployed, and the number of hiring, the sort of net hiring amount in July and August was much lower. And so, we've had occasionally periods where the economy has bounced back, right? There was a dip in the sort of mid 90s where it was like, oh, are we going to have a recession? No, we kept going until the recession in 2001. But most of the time when those numbers start to turn around, it's the sign that a recession is coming.
All right. Well, thank you so much for being here and giving us your expertise. We really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
All right. Well, we'll be right back. All right, welcome back. So before we go, I wanted to share a story with you. We were able to help a local man get his money back after he had been waiting for a refund worth hundreds of dollars for months. Here's the story.
I think I haven't got this month.
Neil Ben Harris says he bought a pair of sneakers online from Saks Fifth Avenue in November that he ended up not liking. So he immediately shipped them back to the company.
I sent it back on November 17th, and it took a few days to get it, another week or so for me to get correspondence with Saks.
He says in December he got an email stating the company had received the sneakers, but was left wondering where his $400 refund was after calling the company several times.
How frustrating is this for you?
Oh, it's extremely frustrating. And I don't like going to the mall, so I buy everything just about online. And the problem is the pictures they show you are not always how the item comes in. and I didn't care for it when I got it.
According to the company's website, refunds generally take up to 30 days. After waiting for more than a month and a half, he reached out to 12 Responds in mid-January.
You know, I primarily watch Channel 12, so, you know, and I've never done anything like this before.
Hoping to get a resolution.
All I'm looking for is to get this situation rectified and move on.
All right, so we did reach out to Saks Fifth Avenue twice, and he did get his money back. They didn't really give us an explanation as to why. And of course, if you ever have a problem or consumer issue or complaint that you need help with, you can reach out to us here at 12 Responds. We'll see you next time.